أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. It's so delightful to follow such gorgeous recitation because one's heart is already melting, so in fact nothing else needs to be said. But I think perhaps then let me start with a heart-melting description of the Prophet ﷺ on the Hilya. And I'm quoting. And this is a description by Mawlud of the Prophet ﷺ. I saw a man, pure and clean, with a handsome face and a fine figure. He was not marred by a skinny body, nor was he overly small in the head and neck. He was graceful and elegant, with intensely black eyes and thick eyelashes. There was a huskiness in his voice, and his neck was long. The beard was thick, and his eyebrows were finely arched and joined together. When silent, he was grave and dignified, and when he spoke, glory rose up and overcame him. He was, from afar, the most beautiful of men and the most glorious, and close up, he was the sweetest and the loveliest. He was sweet of speech and articulate, but not petty or trifling. His speech was a string of cascading pearls, measured so that none despaired of its length, and no eye challenged him because of brevity. In company, he was like a branch between two other branches, but he is the most flourishing of the three in appearance and the loveliest in power. If he commands, they obey implicitly with eagerness and haste, without frown or complaint. May God bless them and grant them peace. God, pray for and grant peace to Muhammad, your servant, your prophet, and your messenger, the Ummi prophet, to his family and to his companions, and grant him peace. Ameen. And I begin with this description purely because I want to revel in the beauty and the fragrance of the Prophet. Okay, just wait if you can't hear, and then I'll see if I can speak up. Is that any better?
That's better.
Okay. Okay. A Quranic verse that describes the Prophet ﷺ, and I will send salutations this one time, and every other time that I mention our Nabi's name, I'm intending the salutations, so that I'm not peppered the entire talk with salutations only. And the Quranic verse reads, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. And we have only sent you as a mercy to all of the worlds. My beloved sisters and brothers, we gather here today to celebrate the birth of our beloved Prophet and Messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ours is a gathering of remembrance of this great model of human conduct, what the Quran describes as uswatun hasana, the beautiful model. We gather to celebrate this gift of life, of light, what the Quran describes as sirajan munira. We gather to give thanks for this one being who the Quran describes as rahmatul alameen, the mercy to all of the worlds. And today I would like to reflect on what it means to remember, invoke, and emulate a prophet who was sent to be a rahmah to all the worlds. I want us to hold this idea of all the worlds, of this multiplicity of worlds that this prophet of ours is a mercy to. What might it mean for our world right now to invoke rahmatul alameen in a world that by all indicators seems to be saturated by the opposite of mercy? A world where cruelty and the most diminishing forms of human interaction seem to dominate. What does it mean to invoke rahmatul alameen, the uswatun hasana, the sirajan munira for our times, my beloved sisters and brothers? And what might this mean for the multiple worlds we inhabit? Indeed, the central spiritual and ethical challenge for us is to imagine and to envision and to contribute towards a complete transformation of the modes of engagement that seem to define our planet. To think about what it means in our time to transform societies characterized essentially by structures of domination, and at times violent domination. Violence that seems to range from intimate forms of violation of the most vulnerable groups of people, like women, like children, like queer people, and as we are aware, especially in these 16 days of activism, saying no to gender-based violence, and I want to give a particular recognition to those of us that are in orange as a kind of signifier of saying no to violence and of not turning away in moments when we see violence against women, children, or queer people. To broader forms of political violence and atrocities in our world, which are so fully embedded in structural injustice. In these times of overwhelming levels of zulm, bad qualities and human vice is so shamelessly paraded in the varying political theatres of the dunya. There is a glaring lack of public virtue epitomized in the blatant lack of morality in our political leaders, who not only lack morality, but bald-facedly parade their negative qualities and depravities, whether we're looking at the political landscapes in South Africa, in India, in the Middle East, or in the US. And in the last while, there is a rising tide of evidence that a number of religious leaders in varying parts of the world might in fact be sexual predators. On a more macro scale, it's a world where the human race continues to unthinkingly exploit, ravage, and aggressively consume the Earth's resources without reflecting on sustainability or our more fundamental responsibility of trust and stewardship of the Earth that we've been given. And these are only a small bit of the challenges of our time. One might, if you were to reflect on the current state of the world, think that perhaps there's something to be said for what Omid Safi, in his beautiful book, and I strongly recommend it, it's called Memories of Muhammad, what Omid Safi describes as a Jahili mode of consciousness, not just the period of ignorance before the coming of the Prophet, but the Jahili mode of consciousness, where the term Jahiliya is not simply a state of ignorance, but is actually associated linguistically with this idea of a mad, rabid dog. We seem to be surrounded by intense forms of madness and corruption that can only be described as Jahili. Collectively, each of these examples of social and political violence that I've mentioned, I believe, illustrates something shared and common that underlie each one of them. What might be termed a model of domination or a paradigm of domination. That is, a model of power in our societies and in our communities that's premised on hostility, on self-absorbed greed, and on aggression. And in some sense, it might well be seen, if we think of the spiritual disease, if we think of it as spiritual disease as the kind of macro projection of the lower self onto the stage of the world. Now, it's imperative for us to state and recognize how, in fact, so much of the violence and aggression on this planet is, in fact, primarily caused by men who are reared in what activists would call toxic masculinity. The pervasive structures of violence the world over is indeed built on a model of masculinity that frames strength as authoritarian and aggressive, and one that is responsible for the mess we're in. And brothers and sisters, I don't say this as an accusation or as blame-seeking, purely as recognition and observation. And a form of masculinity that we all implicated in, not only men. Now more than ever, it seems that we are called upon to think about and to act in ways that might begin to transform these paradigms of domination. Indeed, in our times right now, bereft as it appears to be of beauty, mercy, compassion, and justice, we are starved for models of beautiful conduct that might inspire a different world. We are compelled, perhaps more than ever, to create new ways of being, new ways of acting, new modes of relationship, to change our ways of engaging both personally and socially, so that we might instead operate within a framework or a worldview that values and encourages reciprocity, that encourages love, that nourishes justice, and that allows for an overflowing of mercy. A world that is the true legacy of the Prophet as Rahmatul Alameen. This is the challenge of our times. And in order for us to be inspired by the model of the prophetic personality, it is important for us to reflect on how we have and how we continue to see, understand, and imagine the prophetic model. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is indeed the central animating personality of Islam. And throughout the ages, Muslims have approached this founder of our tradition in a variety of ways. By attempting to follow the Sunnah as a sacred source of guidance, we attempt to walk in the footsteps of Muhammad in a myriad ways. Perhaps for some, this Imatio Muhammad is more immediate in terms of fashioning one's bodily sense of how to dress, how to grow your hair for some men, or what foods to eat or to abstain from, to a more general sense of following his example to perform our prayers, our consistent acts of devotion and remembrance, our expressions of piety, to treading the Mohammedan path in quest of deeper forms of intimacy with God and a clearer sight or discernment of reality with a capital R, to the prophetic models of relationship we are inspired by in our interactions with other human beings. As many Muhammads as there are Muslims, each one draws and remembers their prophet with the fullness of their own personalities and with the state of their hearts. And the recollections, invocations, and retrievals of the Prophet Muhammad involve, in fact, the whole range and spectrum of human inclinations, human needs, and human aspirations. In the same way that the Quran tells us that our understandings of the Quran is in fact contingent on our state. The Surah 39 verses 17 and 18 tell us that those who listen to the word and follow the best meanings within it are blessed and are guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning in fact that there are those that do not have the best meanings. There are multiple kinds of ways in which one can understand and interpret the Quran. Similarly, if we aspire to the best and the most exalted meanings of our beloved Prophet, whose exquisite fragrance of mercy and compassion exist, then we will revivify our hearts, minds, and our bodies. So, my beloved brothers and sisters, the question to us today and in our time is, what do we seek to remember? What models for human nature do we seek to bring to the fore in our relationship with the Prophet Muhammad? I'd like to draw briefly on some of the most luminous parts of our tradition. Let me start with one Hadith al-Qudsi, where we are told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I quote this Hadith Qudsi, "Were it not for you, O Muhammad, I would not have created the world." Could this be referring to one human being? We might perhaps ask ourselves. Perhaps another Hadith will help us out here. There's a Hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says, and I quote, "I was a prophet even while Adam was between clay and water." So here, there's an allusion to a deeper metaphysical dimension of the Prophet. Not simply the 7th century historical man, but a universal, primordial dimension of our Nabi. We learn from our greatest spiritual teachers that the nur, or the light of Muhammad, was the first thing that was created. Accordingly, all of the prophets from Adam through to and including the final historical Muhammad were in all, in fact, created through this very first light, or nur al-Muhammadi. And what was the imperative for the creation of nur al-Muhammadi, the light of Muhammad? Allah tells us in another Hadith al-Qudsi, "I was a hidden treasure, and I love to be known, and so I created the world in order to be known." Every time I speak, you will hear this Hadith al-Qudsi. So the essence of Muhammad and the essence of all creation arose from divine love and desire, and as a means to manifest the primordial light of God. And it is the Nur al-Muhammadi that's not simply found in the Prophet of the 7th century, but it's the light of Muhammad alive within each one of us. The Shaykh Mawlud, the Turkish Rifai teacher, tells us that while the Muhammadan light and character is inherent to every human being, in every pore of our being, in some, the manifestation of this character is illuminated. In some, it is half illuminated, and in others, it is dark. Allama Iqbal, a great Indian philosopher and thinker, stated that the love of Muhammad runs like the blood in the veins of the believers. And we love not only our historical Prophet Muhammad, who we certainly and indeed do love, but we especially love the Muhammadan legacy that we are meant to embody and that is meant to ignite the world. When we embody this vision of Muhammad, we seek a very different kind of masculinity in our world, and indeed a very different kind of humanity. A Muhammad that shows enormous compassion and generosity to all human beings, not only in the ways that he acted as statesman, but in the smallest encounters with other human beings. There's a hadith by Abu Hurairah. I've decided not to get into his big political moves of generosity because it's these beautiful little stories that I think are the deepest gems. Abu Hurairah reported, this is sweet but also quite multi-leveled. A man came before the Prophet and said, "I am ruined, O Messenger of God." And the Prophet asked, "What it is that has ruined you?" asked the Prophet. The man replied, "I had sex with my wife during the fast of Ramadan." The Prophet asks, "Are you able to free a slave?" "No," said the man. "Well, how about feeding 60 people?" Again, "No," said the man. So the Prophet sent someone who returned with a basket full of dates. "Take these," he says to the man, "and give them out in charity." And the man inquired, "To poorer people than myself?" And he said, "There is no household between the two lava plains of Medina more in need than me and my family." The Prophet laughed until you could see his canine teeth and said, "Go and feed your family." And in this small human encounter, we see indeed Uswatun Hasana, the beautiful model, who even in holding someone accountable to a ritual obligation is more invested in compassion, in mercy, in well-being, in nourishment, in humor. We also see that the expiation of a spiritual transgression is in fact a social redress, is in fact freeing a slave, is in fact giving food to the poor. And so we are taught, even in this very little story, about the integrity between the spiritual, the ritual, and the social. And the other story that I'm going to very quickly allude to, and we all know the story of the old woman that the Prophet would pass, who would heap rubbish, and throw it on him every time he passed on his way to the masjid. And we know that one day she didn't do it, and the Prophet was concerned, was curious what's going on with her, and he asked the neighbor, "What's the matter?" And he said, the neighbors informed him that the woman was in fact ill. And so he went in, and she was taken aback and startled, and she assumed that he was there to accost her in a time of her own weakness. And in fact, he said that he's come to inquire about her well-being. And so she was extremely shocked, and of course the story goes that she embraced Islam because of this model of compassion. But I think the story, in addition to telling us what an extraordinarily generous human being is, actually teaches us something profound about how to engage in a world where we seem to be assaulted by all kinds of trash falling down on us. I think there's a deeper wisdom to the story. What might it mean to be non-reactive? What might it mean to choose to act from a space of integrity? What might it mean to not simply get angry or try and explain to this woman why in fact he's a good man? What might it mean to silently bear it, but to actually have this model and decide to respond from a space of beauty, from a space of largesse, from a space of compassion? In all these stories, we see a vision of Muhammad that presents us with a very different form of humanity. This prophet is the opposite of the pharaonic model of superiority or domination, or the Iblisi model of I am better than him. Instead of a toxic, aggressive masculinity, we find models of generosity and mercy. Umid Safi calls the changes wrought by the beloved prophet, he calls it the Muhammadi revolution. And he argues that this was a revolution of the heart, an inner transformation that began in the retreat, in the caves of Hira, and then this movement of the heart and the spirit resonated and reverberated, bringing in its wake a radical transformation of Arab society and the rest of the world. Let us figure out within each of us, who are the bearers of the light of Muhammad, how we might in fact bring this radical transformation into our world. And this is not an easy task. The task of the spirit and the task of the bearers of the prophetic legacy is not an easy one. It is a struggle of cleaning and purifying internally and cleaning and purifying externally. And I have to end, well, I've got two things to end with, but a poem from Farid ibn Attar's Conference of the Birds. Consider those who have entered into the way of the Spirit. Look at what happened to Adam. See how many years he spent in mourning. Contemplate the deluge of Noah and all the patriarchs suffered at the hands of the wicked. Consider Abraham, who was full of love of God. He suffered tortures and was thrown into the fire. See the unfortunate Ishmael, who became blind from weeping, who was offered up in the way of divine love. Turn towards Jacob, who became blind from weeping for his son. Look at Joseph, admirable in his power as in his slavery in the pit and in the prison. Remember the unhappy Job, stretched on the earth, a prey to worms and wolves. Think of Jonah, who having strayed from the way, went from the moon to the belly of a fish. Follow Moses from his birth. A box served him for a cradle, and the Pharaoh exalted him. Think of David, who made himself a breastplate and whose size melted the iron like wax. Look at Solomon, whose empire was mastered by the jinn. Remember Zechariah, so ardent with the love of God that he kept silent when they killed him. And John the Baptist, despised before the people, whose head was put on a platter. Stand in wonder at Isa, at the foot of the cross, where he was saved himself from the hands of those who betrayed him. And finally, ponder over all of the chiefs of the prophet who suffered from insults and injuries of the wicked. After this, do you think it will be easy to arrive at a knowledge of spiritual things? It means no less than to die to everything. O Holy Creator, vivify my spirit. Believers and unbelievers are equally plunged in blood, and my head turns as the heavens. I am not without hope, but I am impatient. And I would like to end bringing back into a consciousness our 16 days of activism and end with a hadith, which I think is one that we perhaps have heard many times, but I would like us to sit with it and to let it nestle in our hearts and think what it might mean for each of us. And the Prophet ﷺ says, the believer with the most complete faith is the one with the best character and disposition. And the one with the best character is one who treats women with dignity and honor. Thank you.